Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another session on the short course on epidemiology. Today, Dr. Namrata will be talking to us about complex healthcare interventions and what we should look at when we are designing one and evaluating a complex healthcare intervention. Without further ado, over to Namrata.
Good morning. Like Tina ma'am said, we are looking at how a complex healthcare intervention is developed, how it is conceived, and a little example of a mixed method study that has been used in the evaluation of a complex healthcare intervention. I just wanted to start with an example of a healthcare intervention. So in 2019, Dr. Peden and his colleagues set out to understand a national quality improvement program that would improve outcomes among patients who are planned for emergency abdominal surgery in the UK. So this was the study that was published in the Lancet in 2019. It was effectiveness of a national quality improvement program to improve survival after emergency abdominal surgery. So this was a multi-step program that involved patient education, ensuring that patient was brought from the operation theater, taken to the operation theater quickly, brought back to the ward, quality control in the ward in their post-operative care. So this was called the EPOC trial. So the trial, like I said, implemented a large national quality improvement program, involved 15,873 patients among 93 NHS centers, organized into 15 geographical clusters. So this was a massive trial. The program spanned 82 weeks, which is and nearly like 2 years, and involved considerable effort, training, and manpower. So, sorry, 1 second. Yeah. So the results of the EPOC study, and these are excerpts from the article that is published, they have said there was a good engagement with the quality improvement program, but staff had limited time and resources for implementation. To succeed, a large national QI program needs to allow for differences between hospitals, ensure teams have time and resources need to improve patient care. There were wide variations in intervention fidelity between hospitals. Fidelity means how they decided the intervention. Was that how it was actually implemented? Okay. So there was wide intervention in fidelity between hospitals. These findings show that in the context of quality improvement, the thing is far more complex than previously thought, especially with large national programs. So why did such a large study, which took 2 years and probably 90 hospitals involved, why did it fail? It failed because the planning was probably not complete. They didn't consider the context, they didn't consider the hospitals involved. It was a good idea, but it stopped at being an idea, in the sense the actual implementation of the idea wasn't thought through fully. So one principle is this Islagiet, that is the principle that was coined by Professor Marty Eccles, which said that it seemed like a good idea at the time. That is the expansion of this. So basically, if you think of an idea, you think of an intervention to change a behavior, you need to understand the complete context of who's behaving, why are they behaving like that, what is the context in which they're behaving, and then develop the intervention. So if you skip this part of understanding what exactly is the behavior we have to change and why and how we are trying to change it, and you come up with an intervention, then it will lead it down a fruitless path. So Ballas and Boren said that there is in 2000, they published a paper which said that there is an approximate 17-year gap between research and actually putting it into practice. Now, these are this is partly because publication of research and all takes time, and also because implementation of research is a science in itself. Something that looks good on paper might not always be good in practice. Something that we theorize might not be always pragmatic. So coming to this, the structure of today's talk is basically to understand the framework of a complex healthcare intervention. We are going to understand how healthcare interventions actually have to be planned and executed, and there are guidelines for these. The next is to understand a few checklists and tools for reporting, appraising these studies, and to understand a little bit about mixed method studies. And the third is to actually appraise a trial. So the first question, the first part of the talk is, how is a healthcare intervention developed and evaluated? So I'll start with a case scenario. I want to improve hand hygiene in C ward and want to set up an intervention to ensure the same. C ward is our medical ward. So what are the components of this intervention that I have to think of? So when I start to think, I think, what is better to use? Is it better to use sanitizer? Is it better to use soap? Soap is cleaner, but will everyone go to the wash basin to wash their hand in between every patient? Will they walk all the length of the ward between every patient and go to the wash basin? Probably not. Who should I target? Who has the worst hand hygiene? Is it doctors? Is it nurses? Is it medical students? Should I target all of them? Do I have the time and resources to do this for everybody? Who will check if this hand washing is being done correctly? Should I check everybody? Should I make nurses check? How often should I check? Who will offer the positive feedback? Should I give some negative feedback? Will medical students be upset if their supervisors tell them you're not washing hands properly? Will doctors be upset if nurses tell them you're not washing hands properly? How will I assess my intervention? Should I put everyone's hand on a culture plate and check how much bacteria is growing? Or should I check the rate of multi-drug resistant interventions at the end of all this? So for such a simple intervention like hand washing, there are so many things to think of before you start implementing, right? This is just off the top of our heads. So at the end of it, you'll be totally confused as to how to implement this intervention. So luckily for us, there is a framework called from the UK, the Medical Research Council guideline, which tells us how to conceive a healthcare intervention. What are the things that you have to check out before you actually make the intervention itself? So one more thing I wanted to introduce before we dive into the MRC guidelines is there is a shift from just looking at whether an intervention is effective alone. We are now thinking, is an intervention not just effective, but is it acceptable, implementable, cost effective, scalable, and transferable across contexts? It's not just if I wash my hands, there is 10% decrease in MDR interventions. But am I making a cleaner environment in C ward? Is it allowing better intra-team communication? These are also questions that we have to look at. So I thought, like, when we are understanding this guideline, why don't we look at examples from our handheld intervention to understand each aspect of the MRC guideline? So the first thing that the MRC guideline says is you have to have a clear research question and you should have a perspective about what you want from your intervention and where you're doing the intervention. So the first question is efficacy. How well does placing hand sanitizer work in an ideal situation, in an ideal ward where everyone has time and not that you should not wash your hands if you don't have time, but still everyone has in an ideal setup where there's hand sanitizer available at every bedside and people have time to do rounds sequentially between every patient, not interrupted during rounds. That is an ideal. So that is efficacy. Effectiveness is actually when we place it in our medical ward, how well does a hand hygiene intervention work? Given the constraints of manpower, resources, time, and all of that. The next question is theory-based. If I implement a hand hygiene intervention in, say, a surgical ward or in an operation theater, will it work better than a medical ward? And systems. Can hand hygiene change the dynamic of rounds? Will all members be willing to implement this hand hygiene intervention? So this is the first thing that we look at in the framework. Now, the framework is divided into 6 core elements and 4 phases of healthcare implementation. So first, we have to address all the core elements of the intervention that we want to bring about. And then we have to look at development. Is it feasible? How do you evaluate and how do you implement? So the first thing that we are going to look at is what are the core elements of a healthcare intervention. I've just summarized it on this slide. So the first thing is the context. So where the intervention is being implemented will affect its success or failure. For example, if you implement say a smoking program, an intervention to stop smoking in an area which is ridden with drug problems, alcohol, youth issues, and smoking related issues, you will need to have a much more intensive program as compared to if you implement a smoking cessation program in a hospital. Correct, right? So the people that you're implementing on is also important. When you come to hospital with a COPD exacerbation, your mindset is to stop smoking, as opposed to a community where smoking is the norm, correct? So the next thing is program theory. So program theory is a theory that describes how an intervention is expected to lead to its effects and under what conditions. This isn't just an extension of the context where you draw out the entire program. We will come to it, but you draw out the entire program and you see what are the relationships of each program to its context, to its environment, to each aspect of your intervention. Stakeholders are people who are targeted by the intervention or policy, also those involved in development and delivery, and those whose personal and professional interests are affected. For example, in my smoking program, who all will be affected? The people who I am doing the smoking intervention on, their families, their peers. Also affected is ITC cigarette company. Also affected is tax, because there is a tax on cigarettes. So government is affected. So actually, if you think about it, an intervention is not only for that person, right? It actually affects systems till the government of the country that you're implementing in. So the next thing to look at is what are the key uncertainties. Any intervention, when you implement it, there will be uncertainties that come on the way. For example, I am implementing this smoking program in my hospital, and I am trying to find out who all came with COPD exacerbation in the last 1 year to address smoking intervention among them. What if clinical workstation doesn't work and I'm not able to draw out that data? At any point, power can get cut, Wi-Fi might not work, electricity will go off, technology might be an issue, and there might be other issues also with personnel and people. Refinement. So when you address these uncertainties, you can refine your program theory. So you will put in these determinants also into your program theory. What if the Wi-Fi doesn't work? What if current is cut? What if people go on strike in the hospital? All these are refinements that you bring to your program theory. And finally, that always important is the economic consideration. How much does it cost to bring about a smoking intervention program? Okay, so these are the core elements that I've summarized. Now, the next thing to do is, how do we develop an intervention? So when you develop or identify a complex intervention, either you adapt an old intervention to a new context. For example, our midday meal scheme can also be used as a way to, say, screen for child labor. You can ask everyone who's coming for midday meals. This is just a theoretical concept. I'm just trying to explain with an example. You can ask everyone who comes for midday meals, are you made to work after school hours? Are you under the age of 14 and made to work in a factory? The other thing is you can plan an intervention from scratch. Like there are guidelines for this called the index guidelines. I've linked it below. And the last thing is to ensure that practices and policies are well studied and the intervention has a strong theoretical basis. This should happen at the development stage itself. Your theoretical basis for choosing this intervention, you need to have studied it fully. Like I said, you can't just get up and say, I want to intervene with a smoking program. Why do I need a smoking program in this community is a question that you have to ask right from the onset. So I have an example of this actual intervention that happened in the UK soft drinks industry. This happened from 2014. So basically, there was a group of researchers in Cambridge and Oxford which thought that soft drinks are contributing a lot to public health, causing detrimental public health, like all the way from childhood dental caries to childhood obesity to non-communicable diseases in adults. So this group of researchers got together. Actually, this is their basic map. Okay, this is just the basic thing that they thought about before they started the study. I'm not even going to go into all this. There is a lot. So this is just to say these are external and internal things that can affect why soft drinks are propagated so much in the market. Okay, right from a person's taste to preferring sugary drinks to societal norms of having soft drinks at parties to who are the stakeholders? What are soft drink industry companies getting by marketing these drinks repeatedly? all of these things are interconnected. The more people buy them, the more money they get, the more money they have for advertising, and the more again people will buy them.
The red color internal and the red nose external.
No, sir, not fully. These are it is based on human factors and commercial factors. Now, this is the map that they did after refinement. So, and then they drew these colored lines, which all affects which all, right? So, when they do a map like this, they can understand what are the roadblocks that you're going to come across. So, what happened was what they were trying to do was they were trying to tax sugar that is used in Coca-Cola and drinks like Coca-Cola. So they said that normal sugar will cost 20 rupees. Sugar that Coca-Cola company buys will cost 30 rupees. So obviously Coca-Cola company is not happy, right? And what they had to do was they had to reduce because they don't want to lose money. So they reduced the amount of the drink to keep the sugar same. Because why did they do that? Because when they were selling less sugar in this bottle, people were not buying. So they said, okay, we'll do the same concentration, reduce the drink. But obviously it is not profitable for them. So there were people also who came together and said, what is your problem? What is government's problem? What drink I drink? If I want sugar in my drink, I will drink. Obviously, even the beverage companies rioted. They said that it was not a correct thing to do. But then going on in 2023, they were actually able to show that there were significant declines. So this is soft drink industry levy, okay, the tax. So prior to that, this would have been the rate of dental caries, but actually after they made the tax, the dental caries came down. These are childhood obesity in 6-year-old girls, okay? So these are different quintiles. The last is the summarized graph. So actually they were able to show that obesity among 6-year-old girls reduced 8 years after they brought this tax. Yeah, so this is an example as to how a well-conceived study can actually bring about public health changes in a few years. So coming back to our hand hygiene intervention, we have to ask, do I already have to use some hand hygiene intervention that HICC, Hospital Infection Control Committee, is using, or should I conceive a new one from scratch? And we have to make a conceptual map. So this is just a conceptual map I drew up. So you have to look at like input, implementation, behavior change, output, and outcome. So hand sanitizer availability, coaching, education, what are the points at which hand hygiene has to be done before the bed, after touching the patient's surrounding. All this I have to think of. That is the input. Implementation, how will I implement it? Should I give positive feedback? Should I give negative feedback? Should I give rewards? What are the behaviors that you have to identify? For example, is somebody going to touch a patient without cleaning their hands? So when someone comes, keeps their bag near the patient, you know they're going to touch the patient next. At that point, you should remind them, now you have to use hand sanitizer. Behavioral changes, reduce defensiveness, building awareness, motivation, automaticity. So you should make people understand that when you come with your notebook and bag near the patient itself, you should remember I should use hand hygiene. That is automaticity. And finally, the output is to perform hand hygiene. And the final outcome that you're looking at is decreased hospital infection rates. So this is a conceptual map. This is a very basic map that you draw up to, and this, mind you, hand hygiene is a very simple intervention. It's just a one-step intervention as compared to many complex health interventions that require implementation. Okay, so we have finished developing and identifying, we have finished the core elements, we have finished developing and identifying an intervention. Now we are going to assessing feasibility. So feasibility is whether this evaluation design is actually doable. So in that we look usually how it is done is you do a real world pilot study as to whether this intervention is feasible or not. Can it be implemented in a small population? And you also take some economic data from there. For example, I'll take 10 patients from C ward and keep one, me or somebody else will stand next to these 10 patients bed and tell everybody use hand sanitizer. Then I'll see how much money is used in hand sanitization for these patients. And I will extrapolate that to 40 patients in C ward and say that this is the cost of my intervention. And I found that when I was doing this pilot on 10 patients, actually there was good uptake among all the doctors, nurses, and medical students who were examining these patients. Okay. Then the next part is to evaluate whether your intervention evaluate the outcomes of your evaluation. So first you need to have decided the outcome. Now, these are the aspects that you have to consider when you're considering the evaluation part of your healthcare intervention. So the first thing is the outcome. Do I want a linear outcome or do I want a mixed methods outcome? Most healthcare interventions, linear outcomes are not enough because healthcare interventions finally affect people, they affect stakeholders, they affect governments. So just percentage rate of hospital acquired infections might not be enough. Maybe I will do a social network analysis to identify teaching and mentorship changes among the people who are implementing this hand hygiene. So on the right is my example. Okay, this is what you have to do. The black is what you have to do, and the red is the example with regards to our hand hygiene question. Then you have to choose the study design. So you have to choose, do you want to do a qualitative study? Do you want to do a quantitative study? Do you want to do a mixed study? Do you want to do an adaptive trial? So usually for healthcare interventions, mixed methods are implemented for the simple reason that I said that you need quantitative and qualitative data. And process evaluation. How am I going to identify whether my hand hygiene intervention is being implemented properly? There are 7 steps to hand hygiene. Okay, so I have told that I put up these posters in CWARD that these are the 7 steps of hand hygiene. But actually, are the people who are monitoring, do they know those 7 steps? Are they telling the people that these are the 7 steps of hand hygiene? That is fidelity. What you conceive as an idea should be what is being implemented, or at least 80% of what you conceive should be actually implemented in the healthcare intervention. So that is how you evaluate an intervention. And the final process is implementation. So again, in implementation, we look at the reach and uptake of our services. We formulate a formal implementation strategy, and we consider contextual factors that support or hinder the achievement of impacts. So how many people, patients or healthcare workers will this intervention reach? How can I deliver this implementation across all wards in CMC? Should I put up posters? Should I keep a QR code? Should I make an app on the phone where people can look at how to wash hands before they go to the patient bedside? And other contextual factors. So sometimes there will be, this month new interns joined us, right? So will my hand hygiene uptake be different when new people join us? How will I reach out to new trainees, how will I reach out to patient relatives? So all of this, when sometimes you might not be able to think of all these things ahead, but when you implement it, you should take these feedback from these points and come back and change your program theory. I just wanted to give one more example of a well-done healthcare intervention study. So this is the ASSIST trial. This was a trial that was conceived in 2008. It was actually a trial that was used to for smoking cessation. What they did was they made children from the age of 8 to 14 actually counsel their peers in school. So they found out that in the UK, there was a very high rate of young smokers. Smoking was starting in middle school. So they thought, why is this happening? Why don't we stop this? And they thought, why don't people who don't smoke, your classmates from 8th standard, 9th standard, etc., tell classmates who smoke that why do you smoke? Why don't you stop smoking? There are bad outcomes of smoking as you grow older. There are health hazards of smoking. So this was done in schools across the UK where they led a peer-led group to for smoking cessation. Why I highlighted this intervention, why I highlighted this example now is this study has many merits. It had a very clearly drawn out question. It had a very good program theory. They actually did a pilot among many schools. But the main thing I wanted to highlight in this ASSIST smoking study is the implementation part of it. When they ran the study in schools, they found out actually that students don't have time other than lunch break and snacks break to talk to each other, right? That is something that the program conceivers never thought about when they made this study. They realized that they have only 15 minutes plus 30 minutes to do this counseling. So many students said, I am not able to counsel, not because I don't want to counsel, but just because I don't have the time in school to counsel. And nobody is willing to stay back after school to counsel your friend to stop smoking. So they decided to they changed the implementation such that they made a manual where all the smoking advice is given within 15 minutes in snacks break. They had ways to, so this manual was pretty detailed. they had ways on how to counsel people to stop smoking. So they said if a smoker is saying things like, my friends are doing it, so I'm doing it, this is the next thing you have to address. If a smoker is saying, I did it because my father is smoking, this is the next thing that you have to address. So actually, from the implementation step, they went back and modified their program. That's why I wanted to highlight this smoking theory. And to date, this is a very famous healthcare intervention because it was so soundly done through all the steps that even though it was made in 2008, in 2026 also we are using this program to address sexual health problems among adolescents. The same framework can be used for so many healthcare interventions. So in summary, healthcare interventions are complex. They require understanding the reason for implementation, the context of implementation, the best ways to analyze the results, and the roadblocks that can occur. I'm coming to the end of my first part of the talk. So, when we are looking at healthcare interventions, we might be wanting to look at the context and determinant frameworks. So there are tools for that, like the CFIR, Consolidated Framework for Implementation and Research, or the MRC framework that we just covered. If we want to look at the models, the process models of healthcare, we can look at this EPIS tool, or again, the MRC framework. And if we want to evaluate only the outcome of a healthcare intervention, we can look at the REAIM framework, which we will come to, or there is another framework called the Proctor's Implementation Outcomes Framework. So these are all to look at outcomes of healthcare interventions. Now I'll just come to a little bit about mixed method studies before I get into the... Sorry. Little bit about mixed method studies before I go into the critical appraisal of the trial. So mixed method studies are usually studies that integrate both quantitative and qualitative data within a single study or across multiple related studies. So there are three principles that are very important. One is, just because you are doing quantitative and qualitative, it doesn't discount the quality of either. The rigor for doing a quantitative study, the checklist that you have to do to ensure that everything is there should be implemented. Same way for the qualitative part also. The rationale for why a mixed method should be pre-specified. For example, I feel hand washing intervention, if I only measure outcomes, outcomes like decrease in hospital implementation rate, I am not doing justice to the entire intervention. There are other positive things also that the intervention will bring to the hospital. And just using a infection control rate as the primary outcome doesn't capture the entire goodness of the intervention. Then there is integration. So can I combine quantitative and qualitative data and generate one outcome is a question that we have to ask before we design a mixed method study. So when do we use mixed method study? So this is a little busy table, but there are many concepts in mixed method studies: triangulation, complementarity, development, initiation, expansion. So basically, if a researcher wants to double check their findings, or they feel that a qualitative part of the study will help explain the quantitative part of it. For example, hand hygiene is very low in C ward. Why is that? Because we have had 2 back-to-back admission days and people are tired, they're sleepy, they're not able to remember to use hand sanitizer. So if you need to explain a result that the quantitative part is not able to explain for you, you can use a qualitative arm as well. Sometimes to design a good survey or test, for example, if say a healthcare intervention in itself, like a health education intervention, not only do you have to look at decrease in BMI or decrease in BP, I will also have to look at how did patients understand. Did they understand what education I'm giving them? What is the education level of the patient? So I might need qualitative methods also to fully capture the scope of an intervention. If I want to explore differences in findings from different methods, or if I want to learn more about something, these are all the situations in which we consider a mixed method study to evaluate an intervention. Now we are coming to the final part, which is an example of a mixed method study. So the case scenario is that I'm thinking of an intervention where MBBS students educate the community about cardiovascular diseases and their risk factors and lifestyle interventions for non-communicable diseases when they visit the medicine OPD. But this means that in my OPD, I have to arrange some extra rooms. I might have to arrange some extra staff. So I have to disinvest some resources that I already have. So I am thinking, is this a really good idea? Will this healthcare education intervention actually reduce rates of, high BMI or high BP or high sugars? So to look at this, there is a study with a similar framework that was done in the UK, in Newcastle. So this is a mixed method evaluation using the RE-AIM framework. Remember, I had said the RE-AIM framework is a method to analyze the outcome of a healthcare intervention. So they used this student-led community-based student-led intervention, health intervention in a cardiovascular disease clinic in a community setting, and actually looked at whether this student-based education is helping to reduce certain outcomes that we will come to. Okay, so the setting was actually, it was a clinic in a marketplace. Okay, so there was a marketplace which is often frequented by little elderly adults, and the clinic was set up there. It is a community clinic. It's a walk-in clinic. So whoever wants to check their BP or blood sugars or point cholesterol are able to walk into this clinic and check. It's a busy clinic. It sees a footfall of about 150,000 per month. They had a diverse age population, but most of them are above the age of 40 and a reasonable geriatric population. Why they specifically chose this clinic is because this clinic is called the Young at Heart Clinic. A lot of disadvantaged population also comes to this area. So a population which by the NHS is not eligible for screening because they are not covered by the country's insurance or a private insurance actually visits this market. So they thought that this is a good place to do this education. So they got 22 pharmacy students from Newcastle University to sit in this clinic. And when people walk in, so one person will be standing outside the clinic and saying, do you want to check your BP? Do you want to check your cholesterol? If someone agrees, they will give them a flyer and bring them into the clinic. And then they will say, they will check their BP, cholesterol, whatever, give them the value and tell them this is abnormal or this is normal. Now, if it is abnormal, they are supposed to refer them to a higher clinic. If it is abnormal, they will ask them, do you want us to teach you a little bit about how cholesterol comes to be, or how you get diabetes, or why your BP is high? And if they consent, they will do a 15-minute educational class about how you can modify some of the risk factors for non-communicable disease. So prior to actually this study, this was done in between 2024 and 25. They actually did a feasibility study. So we had already mentioned that actually when we conceive a healthcare intervention, the second step is actually to check whether it is feasible. So they had actually done a pilot study in the same market, in the same clinic with another set of pharmacy students, some 35 pharmacy students. And they had looked at inputs, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. And then, like we said, they had actually gone back and changed the program theory. So that was the first one. After doing the pilot study, they identified all these problems. For example, they found out that if you tell pharmacy students to sit in a clinic whole day, some of them will bunk. So they said you have to have a timetable for students, and this person is rostered to come at this time. Then there was academic supervisors who were at the clinic, had an academic timetable. They actually had a timetable for supervision, who will supervise which student. These are all things that come to be after a pilot study. You find out that these are practical difficulties after the pilot study. So everything that they put in red, I won't go too much into detail with this, but everything that they put in red are things that they actually found out after the feasibility study and modified in their program theory. Okay, now about the data sources from our study. So the principle was triangulation. Triangulation means you use different methods like qualitative and quantitative and data sources from different methods to strengthen your findings. So there were 3 levels at which they studied. The first was the individual level. The students who were delivering the service and the patients receiving the service were interviewed. Then the service level, they looked at all the charts of the people who came to the clinic and saw how many people had diabetes, how many people were this old, how many people were above the age of 70, all these demographic statistics they took from the clinic records. And finally was the organizational level. So the academic supervisors at the clinic and the stakeholders from the onward referral services were also interviewed. So they interviewed 3 sets of people. They used all these data to actually triangulate and come to an outcome. So they did semi-structured interviews with academic staff, patients, and stakeholders. They did focus group discussions with students. They actually took out activity data from the clinic. How many people are visiting? How old are the people who are coming? How many people are actually sick? How many people had a high BP recording? All this data was drawn. And finally, they had fidelity checks also. Again, to remind everyone, fidelity is the correctness of the intervention that is being delivered actually. The overview of the study is there were 6 stakeholder organizations, 5 academic staff, and 22 students. Health checks were delivered to 1,152 patients during the period of the study. They did a qualitative data collection. And then they also monitored the clinic service activity. And they also monitored the intention to change behavior. So they asked patients, before and after this education, how likely are you to change to eat junk food? How likely are you to come often for BP measuring? How likely are you to do exercise every day? So they measured that also across a Likert scale. And then they did fidelity checks. So this was done by one of the interviewers. And they said that more than 80% adherence to the protocol that was initially conceived is good fidelity. That was what they set prior to the study starting. And they did a total of 20 fidelity checks. Out of this, 18 demonstrated that it was the intervention actually had good fidelity. Okay, so the same slide, when we are looking at the outcome, we don't only look, is it effective? We also look, is it acceptable, implementable, cost-effective, scalable, and transferable. So this is why we are using the REAM framework. If we just had to say what is the percentage of people who had less BMI after this intervention, the study would be over and done with a quantitative measure. But because we are looking at qualitative aspects also of a health interventions effect, we have to use a broader framework like example, the REAM framework. So outcomes were presented in the REAM format. So REAM is actually reach, effectiveness, adoption, implementation, and maintenance. So reach is how many people were engaged, what was the demographic of the people. Effectiveness is either based on health, how did their BMI change, how did their sugars change, how did their BP change, also on cost and quality of life. But they didn't do that in this study. Adoption is how well was the intervention taken up by both the patients who are receiving it and by the stakeholders who will see these patients later. And implementation is the delivery fidelity and the modifications that were made. Maintenance is how can you generalize this to another hospital or another clinic in the UK? Can I take the same intervention and put it somewhere else? And will it work as well?
Is it the same as transferability?
Yes. So REAM also can be used in other stages of healthcare intervention like the design, implementation, or evaluation, not only outcome measuring. So in this study particularly, how did they use the REAM framework? So they actually looked at demographics of patient versus local area. So in blue are all the qualitative data, and in red are all the quantitative data. So for each aspect of REAM, they actually had qualitative and quantitative measures. So for reach, they looked at demographics, which is a quantitative thing. And then they had acceptability and motivation for clinic uptake, which is qualitative, assessed from interviews. Then for effectiveness, they had outcomes of checking, that is BP differences, glycemic differences, etc. And rates of behavioral intervention change. So like I said, they had a Likert scale and they said, after receiving this intervention, how likely are you to monitor your BP regularly? Adoption, they had, so the qualitative thing for adoption was how many people are actually being referred. If I had 30 uncontrolled hypertensives, how many of these were actually referred to a higher center? And then they looked at why were they not referred, why didn't they go to the higher center? So they looked at barriers, that was looked at it through an interview basis. Then implementation, they looked at both fidelity of the service delivery and fidelity of the referral. And they looked at barriers to implementation. And finally, to maintenance, they looked at sustainability plan and organizational commitment. So the results of this study were basically, so the middle column is actually the results, and the right side column is the triangulation data. So basically, they looked at, are your qualitative and quantitative factors aligning properly? So if you have a high rate of uncontrolled BP, and you have a cohort that is willing to seek healthcare for this, but you have low referral rate, then there is some lack of convergence, right? So you have found out that there are people who need the intervention. I mean, the people who need healthcare, there are people who are motivated to seek healthcare, but actually the referral rate is low. So you have to go back and check where the problem is. So the convergence, this is the strength of a mixed method study. You are able to evaluate a problem from multiple lenses and find out where the issue is in addressing a problem. So for Reach, they found that the clinic, because it was in a marketplace that had heavy footfall, it was accessible, visible, a lot of people were coming. Many people were elderly adults. A lot of people were actually disadvantaged population who are otherwise not covered by the NHS or by insurances. Effectiveness, there was a high detection of modifiable risk factors. Okay, so uncontrolled BP was seen in 44 people. Hypertension was detected in 44 people. Obese BMI is in 62 people. Dyslipidemia in 36% of the people. And there were significant post-check motivational gains. Adoption. So students were very enthusiastic. Patients were very enthusiastic. But somehow they found one problem. Despite all this enthusiasm, actually very few people were only referred. So there was a problem of inadequate referral and referral uptake and poor addressal of issues like smoking, social isolation, alcohol use. Now, when we read the body of the study, it actually says that when students are confronted with, say, a smoker who has hypertension, they don't know what to do about the smoking part, because they were given education to educate about BP, sugars, and dyslipidemia and obesity. They don't know what to do when people are alcoholic. They don't know. So those kind of people, they said, we'll get back to you, and that getting back never happened. Then the other thing they found out was they required a good online referral system. But a lot of these people don't have insurance, not covered by NHS. Who will they refer to? How do they refer? They're not sure. So that's why the convergence is low on the adoption front. Then implementation. So very good interpersonal delivery. There was quantitative evidence also of effectiveness, sorry, not efficacy. So BMI did not decline by 30%, it declined in 30%. So 30% of the people had a decrease in BMI. There is no data as to how many people actually had lower blood pressure readings and glycemic values. That also had good convergence. Then maintenance. There was very good. See, this also had less convergence because follow-up was very less. It was only 2 months. So in that 2 months, people said, I'm very motivated to change behavior. But actually, we know that for non-communicable diseases, sustained behavioral change might be required to produce some effect. Okay. The last bit is critical appraisal. So the critical appraisal part, in CEU, we have already covered critical appraisal of a qualitative study using the correct checklist. So I'm not going to dwell a lot on each aspect because there are multiple checklists that we have to use for a mixed method study. So I just want to introduce the checklists, and I have appraised them for this study. And then we'll come to the summary of the study. So the first one is CREDICI. So this is a reporting checklist. It is not an appraisal checklist. Reporting checklist means, has the study reported what all they're supposed to report? So this is the CREDICI checklist. So I was able to identify problems with, I felt that why did they use this student-based clinic was not said in the first place. They have also said that this is the first model in which actually students are used to educate NCD. But then there should be some theory as to why they thought pharmacy students are good to educate a market full of people. Then the other issue I felt was they did not draw this program theory map of what are the interactions between all the components of the intervention. They did not really describe what all materials and tools. It would have been helpful if they had that, what was the educational method given to these pharmacy students so that they were able to educate people. It is written that data can be shared if you ask the author, but like it was not available freely. And then the costs and economic considerations of this was also not mentioned in. this or any of the prior pilot studies. Then coming to the qualitative part of the study, so the checklist we use for this is COREC. COREC is a 32 3 domains with 32 items to look at the quality of a qualitative study. So the first domain is research and reflexivity. So basically there were, it was fellows in health psychology and pharmacy, professors of pharmacy that were involved from the Newcastle University in the UK. And one thing is, in a qualitative study, when interviewers are interviewing participants, you should always know who is the interviewer. For example, my response might be different if I'm talking to my peer, if I'm talking to my boss, right? So always we need to have in a qualitative study, you need to write what is the relationship between the interviewer and the people who are being interviewed. So that part was missing from this study. Also, reflexivity was not clearly mentioned. Reflexivity means how will the interview findings change based on who the interviewer is. What did the participants know about the researcher? Yes, they were from the same university. Not the patients, that is, I'm saying the students who were giving this healthcare intervention. And was there enough characteristics reported about interviewer or facilitator, bias, assumptions, reasons, and interests and research topic? So they have written that interviewer was independent from the clinic delivery staff to reduce social desirability bias. But the person who was interviewing these patients and asking them, will you change your methods after coming to our clinic, was actually the student who was administering this intervention. So obviously, if somebody has taught you something and then they ask you, was it useful? Most people will say, yes, it's useful. Most people will not say no, right? Then is the study design. So this was a mixed method study with a concurrent triangulation. Participants were selected out of convenience and consent. And how were participants approached, either face-to-face or by Microsoft Teams. How many participants were in the study? So 5 academic staff, 4 stakeholders, 22 students, and we saw some 1,522 patients. Sorry. How many people refused to participate or dropped out? So 2 stakeholder organizations. The stakeholders were the referral hospitals. Okay. So 2 of them actually said that they will not participate. Why did they say no? We don't know. Also, this process of choosing stakeholders was also not clear. They had chosen one mental health hospital. They had chosen one smoking cessation clinic. They had chosen an elderly care home. Why were these stakeholders particularly chosen was not clear. And then what is the setting of data collection was done in the clinic itself. Nobody was present besides the participants and researchers. And participant demographic data I have just detailed here. So 1,152 attendees, mostly in middle-aged. 31% attendees were from deprived quintiles, and there were diverse ethnic groups. 79% were white British, 9% were Asian. Okay, so about the data collection, few of the critiques that I had were these questionnaire prompts, guides are not readily accessible. There were no repeat interviews carried out. And were actually in a qualitative study, when a participant gives an interview, you're supposed to transcribe the whole thing and give it back to them and say, is this what you said? You have to check it back with the participant. That was not mentioned that it was done. Also, how many data coders coded the data? Was the data coding described? All this is not described in the study per se. So these were few of the critiques that I had as based on the COREC checklist. Yes, so based on reporting, reporting was fairly good. Major themes and minor themes were described and presented. And in another paper, they have actually written excerpts from the interview. And there was consistency between qualitative and quantitative findings, and they had done this triangulation to find the concurrence as well. So that was the end of the COREC checklist. Now there is a checklist, critical appraisal tool called the MMAT, which is used for mixed method studies. So again, you are supposed to see whether first in MMAT, you see, is it a clear research question? And did they collect enough data to answer these questions? Only if these two are okay, do you proceed? And then you see what kind of study you have. So I have qualitative, I don't have quantitative randomized. I don't have quantitative non-randomized. I have quantitative descriptive. So I only answer these two parts of the MMAT. And you have to answer the mixed methods part of it. So this is my critique. Most of the things I thought were well done. The only thing sorry, this is not supposed to be there. The only thing that I thought was a little iffy was the biases were not clearly mentioned, and all the data that they used, the coding that they did, and the actual stuff that they got from the interviews were not available to the available easily on the internet. So the summarized critique of our study is that the strengths I felt were it was a mixed methods design. They used a good framework called the REAIM framework to actually look at the outcomes. They had done a pilot feasibility study. They had dual goals of both student education as well as health education. There was triangulation done to increase the credibility of the findings, and it helped to address community healthcare needs among a disadvantaged population. But the weaknesses were that the research question was not clearly outlined. The theoretical basis was not explained. There were a lot of biases in the interview process. Transcripts were not freely available, probably transferable, but not maybe generalizable. There were issues in implementation and referral systems. There was some self-reported behavioral change, but the person who was eliciting that was not the ideal person who was supposed to be eliciting that. And process of selection of stakeholders were not clear. Okay, these are my references. Questions.
Thanks, Namrata, for that very extensive talk on complex health interventions.